Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you've joined us today for today's Lunch and Learn, integrating edible native trees into your garden and green space. You can feel free to drop your name into the chat. If you are working on your own property or in a green space, feel free to drop into the chat where that might be in the Atlanta metro area. And also continue to drop in any questions you might have for today's presenters from Foodwell Alliance and UGA. I wanted to introduce Quinn, who is my amazing colleague. Quinn and I will be working together to gather your questions and make sure Flannery and Gabrielle, who are experts today, can answer them. So thanks again for being here. For those of you all who are not familiar with Trees Atlanta, our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forest, and we do this through planting trees throughout the Atlanta metro area, conservation work such as forest restoration projects and green spaces throughout the city, and also educational programs such as today's. And I really encourage you to get involved and check out what's going on by visiting our website. This educational program is made completely free for anyone to learn how to protect and improve the urban forest through our sponsors at the City of Atlanta, so we wanted to thank them. And if you have a question today, feel free to go ahead and just drop it into the chat. Quinn and I are working together to make sure we can pass those questions on to our amazing experts today. A copy of the recording will be made available on YouTube at Trees Atlanta. And both Gabrielle from UGA Extension and Trees Atlanta will be sending out a survey, and that just helps Foodwell, UGA, and Trees Atlanta work together to better serve you all. If you are an arborist, we'll be dropping in a link for some continuing education units towards the end of today's program. And I just wanted to give a shout out for some really wonderful programs coming up. Next Thursday night, there's going to be a great presentation on the way a group of partners that are trying to plant trees in the heart of our city and some of our most downtown paved areas. It will be really great, and it's so impressive the work they're doing. In October 21st, we're going to be partnering with Atlanta Botanic Gardens to bring in a wonderful speaker named Bill Thomas from the Chanticleer Garden outside of Philadelphia. Bill is doing incredible work, and if you're into entomology and beneficial insects, and the work that he's doing is incredible and inspiring for many people throughout the country. And if you like today's session, you might also really like the Cherokee Ethnobotany and Land Use program that's going to be happening in November. Also, Flannery's can share a little bit more about Foodwell Alliance's fruit tree sale. We also have a native tree sale that's going on this Saturday at the Carter Center, so come check us out. You can follow us on social media and also sign up for our email to get more involved in protecting and improving Atlanta's urban forest. And with that, I'm so excited to introduce our experts today. If you do not know Gabrielle LaTora, you are in for a treat. She is Fulton County's UGA Extension agent. She's an entomologist by training. She loves helping people with insects in their farms and gardens, and she's really passionate about closing the gap between the food we eat and people. She works with farmers really throughout Fulton County to help make their production more sustainable and profitable. In addition to that, she's coordinating our Master Gardener program, which is such a great resource. And she's also overseeing the North Fulton Community Garden. Her favorite insect of the moment is the Pandora Sphinx, and I highly encourage you all to Google it because it's very, very cool. And then our second amazing expert is somebody that I've loved working with for many years. I knew her as a volunteer coordinator at Foodwell Alliance, and she helped so many of the growers in the Atlanta Grows a Lot program, and also just growers throughout the city and metro area with their farms through volunteers. And now she's doing the same beautiful work, but as the education manager. And if you're interested in learning about techniques and practices that can really help your garden, farm, or even orchard thrive, she is the person to speak with. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it on to, oops, pass it on to Gabrielle. Let me see.
Thank you
Sorry,
for
guys.
having me while you're, okay, here we go. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, can y'all see? See, I'll make it big. Okay, it wants me to, there, does that look good? Okay, cool. I see some thumbs up. Let me do this. Nope. All right, I'm not the most technologically proficient person, so thank you for your patience. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to work with Beacon and Flannery on this because I feel like this topic was a really natural collaboration between our three organizations. Foodwell Alliance is doing a lot of work with fruit trees and community orchards and edible fruit, fruiting trees in your landscape. And of course, Trees Atlanta does a ton of work with native species and reforesting Atlanta, and I'm just here as a resource to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. Usually I'm trying to steer the conversation towards insects, but I'm really happy to be here talking about this topic. So we're going to be talking about how to integrate edible native trees, and I've got some shrubs and vines in there too, into your garden or your landscape. So here's what we're going to talk about. First, we'll sort of go over why do we care about native plants. Probably most of you on this call already are into native plants or have your own reasons for being interested in native plants. But we'll talk about that sort of briefly. And my picture here is of a beautiful Luna moth, which if you've never seen a Luna moth, they are just spectacular and amazing. And our American persimmon is one of the host plants for Luna moth caterpillars and hickory horn devil caterpillars. If you've never seen one of those, they are so, so cool. So that's just having those two species in your landscape is one reason to plant persimmon and other native species. We'll go very briefly, into recommended species to grow. And I want to not spend too much time on that section. One, because everybody's situation is different. In your yard, there's a lot of factors that determine what you want to plant, which we'll get into. And so a lot of figuring out which species to grow will be on the back end. It'll be research that you're going to do on your own. Please reach out to me if you have questions or your county extension agent, and we'll consult with you to figure out what's the best fit for you. There's too much information about all the different types of plants, which ones you should grow, how to grow them. That would be like a whole class or something. So I'm just going to name some of my favorites that will just give you an idea of what's out there. If some sort of speak to you, you can follow up on those later. Really, where I'm going to spend most of my presentation is in these last two sections. What you need to consider before planting. There's a lot to consider, and I encourage you to spend a lot of time in this part of your journey, figuring out what fits your space, what fits your preferences for what you want to eat, and all that. And then once you have made that decision, you've purchased your plants, you've put them in the ground, how to care for that investment, because this is an investment. Maybe the saplings aren't that expensive, but there's huge potential in every tree that we plant. And so that's why I'm emphasizing all of this planning ahead of time, and then what you're getting into when you plant these trees, because this is an investment and you want to see your investment bear fruit, pun intended. So we'll talk about that too. Okay, so why native species? I'll just say flat out, like, if you haven't read Doug Tallamy's books, please do. He goes into why natives a lot more eloquently and in a more compelling way than I ever could. And reading his books really changed my entire perspective about why to plant native plants. So I encourage you to check out Doug Tallamy's books. And it's worth noting that most of the edible crops that we eat, including fruits, are not native to the eastern, southeast United States or even to North America. And why that itself is not a reason to plant natives, I think it's interesting to think about. Native species have a lot of benefits for putting in your landscape. One, they're easy to maintain. They have evolved in our climate, which is not the most hospitable climate for a lot of fruit trees and a lot of plants that are out there because it's so humid. It gets so hot. We got a lot of bugs. We get some crazy frosts, like, you know, just all of the things about living in Georgia make it hard to grow some non-native species. And so when we are using native plants, those plants evolved here over millennia. They have figured out a way to fit in these niches in this climate. And so for that reason, they're going to be fairly low maintenance compared to some other fruit trees that you might grow. Probably the most compelling reason to me as an entomologist and somebody who really cares about biodiversity is that native species support native insects, native wildlife, and our entire, our healthy ecosystem is supported at its foundation by native plants. Again, I'm a huge Doug Tallamy fan. He goes into this with a lot of data about why we need native plants to support native insects, to support wildlife, and all that. So again, I can't go into it as eloquently as him, but just know that native plants are an anchor for healthy ecosystems. And you can do your part by planting some of these in your landscape. Like, we can't change the entire landscape, although Trees Atlanta is doing an amazing job doing that. But we can, you know, if you live in an apartment like me, I have a little bit of green space. I can put some stuff out there. If you have a property that you own, rent, or manage, that's an opportunity to provide some of these native plants for our ecosystems. The benefit of having edible native plants is that you can grow some food for yourself and for your community. And so that's really fun. We'll get into that more. And then kind of another reason to plant native plants is just to install more beautiful features in your landscape, right? I think there's a lot of crossover with people who are interested in fruit trees and native plants and gardeners, right? And so we can have beautiful native plants in our garden landscapes that do a lot of the same things as our, you know, traditionally aesthetically pleasing non-native ornamentals can do. And we get a little extra fruit out of it. So this is my section where I breeze through my recommended species. I'm sorry if anybody is disappointed that I'm not going to spend the whole talk on this, but again, like, it would take forever to go through all of these, and it's such a personal decision. So my goal here is really just to familiarize you with some of these native plants so you can go out and do some digging and research on the ones that are speaking to you today. So I'll talk about trees first, like this beautiful American plum with these gorgeous white blooms. They bloom in kind of like early to mid spring, and I just think that's absolutely gorgeous. We'll talk a little bit about shrubs like this blueberry. Yes, rabbit eye blueberries are like the blueberries in the grocery store. You can grow those in your landscape, and they're a native species. Blueberries have some unique requirements, which we'll talk about a little bit. And I will say there's some crossover between the trees and the shrubs, because you can sometimes like train or prune a large shrub into a tree form. And some of the trees I'm going to talk about are kind of like big shrubs. And so there's a little crossover there. And then I've got a couple vines at the end, like this gorgeous passion flower vine. Like, look at that flower. Incredible. That I'll talk about at the end of this little section. Okay, so I'm kind of roughly, I'm going from biggest to smallest. It's not perfect, but the biggest tree that we're going to talk about right now is shagbark and mockernut hickories, which are related to pecans or pecans. Sorry, don't come for me. I didn't include pecans in this talk because they're actually native to like the Mississippi River Valley, and I felt like I really wanted to focus on the Southeast, but a lot of folks consider pecans to be native, so just keep that in mind. But shagbark and mockernut hickories are native to the Southeast, and they have really delicious nuts, very similar to pecans. They are a little bit harder to crack, but all the hickories have edible nuts, but these are the ones that produce like the biggest fruits. And shagbark especially, I have a picture later, is gorgeous. It has this really cool bark. This is a large tree, so just consider that this is a full-size tree for your landscape. Black cherry is also like a medium to large size tree. It puts out these cool little berries, which aren't really delicious for eating out of hand or fresh, but they can be made into a delicious jam, jelly, something like that. American persimmon, a lot of folks are familiar with. This is more of like a small to medium sized tree. Gorgeous, like tall, slender kind of look. They're similar, sort of similar to the Asian persimmons. And I think Flannery probably knows more about this than me. So if we get any persimmon questions, I might shoot them over to her. But the fruits are a little smaller. It takes a little practice to figure out when they are perfectly ripe, so you don't get a super astringent bite. But I mean, you can see what the fruits look like. They are delicious when ripe. I see these all over the place. Butternut is sort of a medium-sized tree. It's also called white walnut. So this is a native walnut species. Apparently, these are kind of hard to find, although I did find some online from native plant nurseries. So kind of a stocky, stout tree. Very cool. And you can get some walnuts off of them. American plum kind of verges into shrub territory. This is a thicketing, like suckering species, really good for stabilizing stream banks or somewhere that you have a steep slope or you have erosion happening, because it sends out all these suckers and sort of like creates this thicket. But you can prune it into a small tree. It produces these small plums, and like I said earlier, has gorgeous white blooms in the spring. Allegheny chinkapin, also called chinkapin chestnut, is a native chestnut. This again is sort of like small tree, big shrub crossover. You can prune it however you like, but it produces these cool like spiky nuts. And I love chestnuts. I think there's something we don't get to enjoy that often. So that's a cool option. Pawpaw, probably many people are familiar with pawpaw. This is the largest native fruit in North America, and it's the only fruit in the custard apple family that is native to North America. So if you've ever had like a custard apple or one of these like custardy type fruits, that's kind of the texture of it. Small tree, they have sort of a columnar shape, very cool tree. Also suckering, but not as like thickety as some of these other ones. People say it's hard to get fruit. I think it's just it has to do with pollination, and we get a lot better fruit set with these guys when they're being cross-pollinated with another tree that has distinct genetics. So they're not, it's not that we have male and female trees. They can pollinate themselves on their own tree. We just get better fruit set when they're pollinating with another tree. And if you know the pawpaw patch, they send up these runners, right, that are genetically identical to the parent plant. And so if you really want to get like a lot of fruit, you have to plant two distinctly different pawpaw plants. They can be the same variety and all that. They just can't be the same exact genetics. Red mulberry is one of my favorites. These are all over the place. This also is sort of like a small to medium sized tree. They often will send up like multiple trunks, and they produce these delicious fruits that are just like sort of a blackberry raspberry combo. Mulberry season is one of my favorite parts of the year. I love them. If you plant one of these, don't plant it like over your car or over your deck, because they will drop these soft fruits, and birds love this tree. I had one in the backyard at my previous apartment, and the cedar waxwings were there every year. Of course, they're eating the fruit, dropping them down below. They're doing their thing, pooping right in the tree. And so put this somewhere you don't mind the ground getting kind of messy underneath. And then my last tree I'm going to talk about is downy serviceberry. And I'm not shy about saying that this is my absolute favorite native tree of all time. It's so amazing. It's a gorgeous, like small understory tree. It produces these fruits in June-ish, late May. Some people call it Juneberry. And they're kind of a cross between like blueberries and cranberries. They're not as juicy and delicious as blueberries, but they are really good. And just the tree itself, gorgeous, very elegant. Like this would be a good replacement for a dogwood. Dogwoods are gorgeous. Some dogwoods are native, but they get a lot of diseases, and I'm always getting calls about dogwood. So if you're looking for a dogwood alternative, I encourage you to check out downy serviceberry. And I do some like cut flower arranging for fun sometimes, and I'll pick some of the foliage as like my greenery for my arrangements, and it looks so pretty. Okay, moving into shrubs, we've got American hazelnut. This is another one of those sort of thickety species that will send up runners. And so if you don't want it to spread, you'll have to do a little maintenance. But it's cool that we have native hazelnut. Hazelnuts are just amazing. And it puts out these cool, like, shaggy casings on the around the nut. I don't know what the technical term is, but that just looks so cool, right? Chickasaw plum is kind of similar to American plum. They have the same sort of growth habit. Again, if you've got an area with a lot of erosion, this is the plant for you. If you want a hedge, this might be a good plant for you. And sometimes the foliage will turn red in the fall, which looks really cool in the landscape. Chickasaw plum and American plum, the fruits are like not as good eating fresh out of hand, but make amazing jams and jellies, stuff like that. So they might require a little bit of processing. Rabbit eye blueberry, like I said, this is one of the species of blueberry that you see in the grocery store. So there are tons of varieties of blueberries that you can choose from. Unlike some of these other plants, you've got a lot of options when it comes to rabbit eye blueberry. There's some tips and tricks to blueberries, like when to plant certain varieties so that you get fruit like from the earliest to the latest point and all this stuff. So if you're curious about blueberries, please reach out to me or your extension agent. Elderberry, this kind of borders with like shrub to small tree, depending on how well it's growing and how you train it. But if anybody ever buys that like $30 little bottle of elderberry syrup in the winter, you could get like gallons of that off of these plants. They put out these gorgeous, like big umbels of white flowers on these stalks. Sometimes this is sort of a caveat with elderberry. Those big stalks are really top heavy and will lodge or fall over. So that's something to keep in mind. But then those flowers, of course, get pollinated and turn into these gorgeous, like dark purple berries. Birds also love these berries. They're delicious. They do need to be processed. But lots of options here. Elderberry is also really good in areas that are always moist. So they're pretty adaptable to like what we would consider generally poor soil conditions. Okay, just to touch on my two vine species, we've got muscadine grapes, which I love. I grew up in Virginia and like nobody ate muscadine grapes until I moved to Florida. Before I came to Georgia, that was the first time I had a muscadine, and I was like, this tastes like a grape candy. And somebody taught me like the best way to eat them so that I'm not eating a bunch of seeds and the the skin. So I really enjoy them now that I have perfected the art of eating them. So just like blueberries, there's a lot of commercially available muscadine grapes. So you have a lot of different varieties. I will say these guys do best with a really hardy, established permanent trellis system. So that'll be something to do some research on ahead of time before you buy your vine, right? And they do best with aggressive pruning in terms of fighting disease and getting the most fruit. So these require a little more like infrastructure and maintenance than some of the others, but delicious. One of the best fruits on this whole list. My last vine I'm going to talk about is passion flower vine. And these are really cool. So where muscadine vines, the vines stay there forever, right? You see them year round. Passion flower vine dies back to the ground in the winter. So you would like never know that it's there, which is kind of interesting. This is one of the host plants for the Gulf fritillary caterpillar, which I love, one of my favorites. Actually, these two species, I think they require one of these species in order to reproduce. So if you like Gulf fritillaries like me, then you need to have some passion flower vine on your property. And once you have some there, they really do they don't aggressively spread, but they will spread. So keep that in mind. The fruits aren't exactly like the tropical passion fruit. They're a little bit different, but still delicious. Kind of like sour. They've got little seeds on the inside with like this sour, like juicy coating. So very cool flavor. Okay, this is really what I think going forward, this is the important stuff that I want you to take away, because you can Google like what are native edible trees, right? But these are the things I want you to think about before you go to Trees Atlanta or Foodwell Alliance's plant sales and go crazy and buy all the plants, right? I want you to have thought through this list. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what do you like to eat? I don't want to see you plant something like plant mulberry when you don't like raspberries or blackberries, right? Because you're not going to like what you get off of that tree. So think about what you or the people in your household like to eat, first of all, and also how adventurous you and the people in your household are to new flavors. Most of these plants, not all of them, but most of them are not commercially available for various reasons. A lot of times these fruits don't have a good shelf life. That's pretty much the only reason that we don't have pawpaws in the grocery store, is because they don't last a long time, long enough to fit into our industrialized supply chain, right? And so for that reason, a lot of these flavors might be new to your palate or to your kids' palates. And so that's something to consider. Like, are the people who are going to be eating these fruits open to these new flavors, right? Like chestnuts are not something that we have like in our American culture, like other cultures do have these sort of chestnut traditions. So that's something to consider. I want you to also consider how much you plan to eat or process. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but a lot of these are not great for like eating fresh. Like you need to process them in some way. So like the black cherry fruits and elderberry need to be processed in a certain way so that they are not toxic to you. But others just need to be processed so that you can eat them. Like the nuts that are on this list, for example. So here's my gorgeous picture of a beautiful shagbark hickory. You can see it's like beautiful shaggy bark. It's so cool. Like just the bark would look cool year round in your landscape. Then you get this beautiful fall color, so I think this is a really good option if you're looking for like a large tree in your landscape. But I talked to our foraging specialist at the university, and she loves these hickory nuts, but she says she uses a machinist vise to crack them because they're super hard. They're harder than like pecans to crack. And so that's something to think about. Like if you plant some of these nuts, you're going to have to peel the outside off. You're going to have to crack the nuts before you can even get to the edible part of the fruit. So what do you have the capacity for in your lifestyle? What do you have the bandwidth to do before you go plant like 10 shagbark hickories, right? And like I said, a lot of these native plants have a short shelf life. And so when you get that harvest, you got to have a little bit of time to process them if they need to be processed, or eat them like fairly quickly. And the last thing I want you to consider is aesthetics. So like, what do you want in your landscape? Are you looking for a full-size tree? Are you looking for a shrub? Are you looking for a vine? Maybe you have like a gorgeous pergola that you want to be shaded over in the summer, right? But open in the winter so that you get some sun. Passion flower vine might be a good option since it dies back and then you get some fruits off of it. So think about what you want in your landscape. Also, I kind of touched on this earlier, but some of these plants are more like, I'll say, traditionally aesthetically pleasing than others. This is something that Elizabeth and I were talking about ahead of time, but like people are just coming around to the idea that native plants can be beautiful ornamentals in your landscape. We're still doing a lot of education about that. And if you grew up in the South, you probably have an idea about what plants designate like a beautiful southern garden, right? A lot of those are probably not native to the southeastern US. And so some of these plants are going to be like good plug and play alternatives for like one of these traditionally aesthetically pleasing non-native plants. Others, like the ones that have these thicket forming habits, might not be like what your brain says a southern garden should look like, right? But that doesn't, we can sort of change our thought process about what looks good in our landscapes. And given what we know about native plants and how useful and beneficial they are, I think we can sort of tweak our perception of what looks nice in the landscape. So just think about that, how it's going to look in your landscape and what you're looking for. I also want to talk about this concept of right plant, right place. And many of you, if you're a gardener, you probably know this already. But this idea is that a plant's preferences for certain environmental conditions should match as best as possible what is present at the site where you're going to put it, or what's possible at the site. So it might not be a perfect match for like the amount of sunlight, but maybe you can do a little trimming to like open up an area, or maybe a tree, you remove a dead tree in your landscape and all of a sudden you've got like a full sun area. So there are some things that can be tweaked. And when I'm talking about a plant's preferences, I'm talking about amount of sunlight. A lot of these will thrive like in full sun to partial shade, but you'll probably get more fruit if they're in full sun. I'm talking about soil drainage. Like if you've got a heavy clay soil, not all of these plants are going to like that. Muscadines, for example, like all of our Vitis species, our grapes, like it to be fairly dry. Muscadines are more tolerant than our other Vitis species that are not native, but you don't want to put a muscadine vine in like the lowest part of your yard that holds a bunch of water in the soil. You want to consider soil fertility. Some plants like require more nutrients than others. Some will do fine in like a poor nutrient area, and also room to grow. Like you don't want to put a shagbark hickory in a, I don't know, 7 by 7 foot area because it's going to outgrow that space. So I encourage you to consider the maximum size that that plant is eventually going to be, and make sure that you're matching the growth habit of your plant and its maximum size to the space that you have available. Once you have selected your plant, you have found the perfect place to put it, or maybe the opposite, you found the perfect place and then you found a plant that would do great in that place for our right plant, right place principle, right? Now you can prepare your soil once you have decided what plant you're going to grow. So I work for UGA Extension. Y'all know I'm going to talk about soil testing, right? So that's something that I want you to do several months ahead of when you actually put your plant in the ground. And what soil testing does is it gives us hard data, numbers about what's going on in the soil. So probably the most important metric that you get from your soil test is pH. pH is really important because different plants have different preferred pHs. For example, blueberry likes it really acidic. They like it between like low 4s and high 4s, kind of, which is way too acidic for most of our other plants. That being said, our Georgia soils are naturally acidic, and so a lot of these plants will tolerate soils that are a little more acidic than like what a vegetable in your vegetable garden would tolerate, that kind of thing. But pH is important because if it's out of that preferred range of the plant, if it's too acidic, which is usually the case here in Georgia, or if it's too basic or alkaline, which we don't see very often, but in theory it can happen, then you can have all the nutrients in the world in your soil. You can have all the NPK in your soil, but your plant can't access it. And so before you even fertilize or add any amendments, I want you to tune the pH so that it's right for those plants that you put in, because then you maximize what nutrients your plants can take out of the soil. And that's just a general concept across all plants that we plant, right? Our soil test report will also tell you the levels of phosphorus, potassium, some other macro and micronutrients, and it'll give you recommendations for how you need to amend that soil, either with lime or with fertilizer, to prepare for your plant. So I want you to do that before you install your tree. All of these are perennials, right? And so there's not a ton that we can do. I mean, we can add lime later, but it's better to like tweak that soil before you put your plant in, because then you're setting yourself up for success. So lime, especially lime, takes a while to buffer that pH up to the right number. And so I encourage you to test your soil and start amending it like a couple months before you plan to plant your plant, okay? The other thing I want you to do in the site where you plan to put your plant is what we call an at-home percolation test, or a perk test. And this is a test for drainage. So you can find instructions how to do this all over the internet. It's not rocket science. You dig like a 12-inch hole, like a 1 square foot hole, you fill it with water and you time how long it takes to drain. There are some specific metrics about like if it's draining more than like 4 inches in 12 hours. I can't remember. I'm just making that up as an example, but then you know your drainage is pretty poor or you know your drainage is good. Reach out to me if you have questions about this. And so what if you do this and you find out that your drainage is poor? You have a couple options. You can add a lot of organic matter, so compost, mulch, maybe soil conditioner. Please don't add sand to if you have a clay soil because you'll get concrete. But organic matter really is the way to improve drainage, sort of in the most sustainable and natural way. You can also select a plant for that site that doesn't mind poor drainage, right? So something like elderberry, I'm coming back to, our Chickasaw plum would do fine. So selecting a plant that can tolerate more moist soil, likes their feet to be wet, that would be perfect for that spot. You don't have to do anything, right? The other option is you can plant your tree or your plant in a big container, just like it's the raised bed principle, right? Just don't even put it in the soil and put it above. And then you can really tweak the soil for however you want it to be. All right, so you have selected your site, you've selected your plant, you have prepared your soil, and you have planted your plant. Also, I didn't go into like best practices for planting your tree, which I probably should have put in here, but call me if you have questions about that. You've planted your plant. What do you need to expect to be doing after that? So I recommend soil testing once a year for the first couple years. When your sapling is in the ground and it's like a baby, we want to take care of it, right? That's when it's the most vulnerable. So this is back to this concept of like protecting your investment, investing in your investment so that it bears fruit long term. So we just want to keep an eye on the soil for those first couple years, make sure the pH stays in the right range, make sure we're fertilizing at the right time. And then after that, like, I don't think you really need to soil test very often. Once every couple years, if you're curious about getting a snapshot of what's going on. You will want to fertilize new trees. Native plants generally need less fertilizer than our non-natives. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but we still are going to want to fertilize our young trees, especially if we want them to produce like whatever fruit product we're looking for them to produce. Again, I say according to our soil test report, like we can't look at the soil and know how much nitrogen is in the soil, right? And so when we go based on these numbers, based on this diagnostic, then we know that we're applying approximately the right amount of fertilizer. Because if we just wing it, you know, my grandma applied 3 pounds of 10-10-10 every year or whatever, we could be applying a lot more than that plant actually needs, right? And we could be introducing unnecessary fertilizer into the environment, or we could be not applying enough, and then we're sort of weakening our plant. We're not setting our tree up for success. So I highly encourage you to get a soil test and sort of do your fertilization and any other amending based on that soil test report. UGA Extension does offer affordable soil testing. They're like, well, it depends on your county, but they're like $6 to $12 a sample. So I think it's a good investment to get those numbers. You can also go through a private lab. There's tons of private labs that do this. You will want to be watering your new plant, especially. It depends on the plant. Everything depends. What that plant prefers, how much water it likes. In general, our established ornamentals and landscape plants, that includes natives, want like a half to a 1 inch of water a week. So ideally, we depend on rainfall, right? So one of those cheap plastic rain gauges from Home Depot is like a great investment, I think, because you can keep an eye on how much it's raining every week and supplement water as needed. But really keep an eye on watering our new baby plants. It doesn't mean you need to inundate them with water. Just be on top of it. If we've got droughty conditions, you may need to supplement with some water. And also consider your soil characteristics. Like if you've got a heavy clay soil with poor drainage, you're not going to have to water as often as if you're planting in a big container and you've essentially got potting mix in there that's going to drain super well, right? Pruning is maybe something that you will want to do. I learned this. This is maybe obvious to a lot of people, but I never thought about it until recently, that no plant needs to be pruned in order to grow. We just prune them to do what we want them to do, right? So we might prune to improve airflow, which reduces disease. We might prune to improve our fruit set. We might prune for aesthetics. So like I said, some of these shrubs can be trained and pruned into a tree shape if you're looking for that. Maybe you've got one of these sort of sucker forming species, but you don't want it to spread. So you're going to be wanting to prune those new suckers. So it depends on a lot of factors, but consider that, like, how much am I willing to prune when you're selecting your plant? Like muscadines, for example, are going to require a hard pruning once a year. I mean, again, require is relative. If you want a good fruit set and you want to maintain a healthy plant, then I encourage like one hard pruning a year. And there's a ton of information out there on that. The last thing I want you to be doing is scouting for diseases and insects. And this is the sort of concept that I want to introduce. So we know native species they have co-evolved with other organisms in this space. They've co-evolved with insects. They have co-evolved with disease organisms, fungi, and bacteria. And so unlike a lot of our non-natives, which have not evolved with those insects, we might see some insect damage or some disease on our native plants. And don't freak out. That just tells us that our plants are interacting with the other organisms in the environment, right? That tells us that they're doing what we put them in the landscape to do. The difference between native plants and non-native plants when it comes to pests and diseases is that most of our native plants can tolerate some disease and some pests, right? Or just insects feeding on the plant. We can't have beautiful butterflies and moths without caterpillars, which are herbivores that feed on plants. So that's something to consider. Like we're putting these plants in the landscape so that they can feed some of these organisms. So just expect there will be some like insect feeding, insect interaction, and some disease, but your plant will probably be fine. That being said, just keep an eye on it. If we catch something early, if we identify it early, then we know whether it's a real risk or not. And my example here, let me move my my video here. My example is the photo on the right, which I'm kind of circling, is pecan phylloxera on a pecan leaflet. You will see this also on some other hickories, and if you've got pecan trees in your yard, maybe you've seen these like blisters on the leaves. So these are actually, I get a lot of calls about this, like there's a fungus or there's a disease on my tree. This is actually a type of insect where the female lays her egg in between the upper and lower leaf surface. So inside the leaf in response to that intruder basically creates this gall. It creates this blister of hardened tissue around the insect. And so the insect and the tree have co-evolved. It's kind of like they call it an evolutionary arms race, basically, to have this relationship. And so the insect is capitalizing on the plant producing this gall so that the young insect, the juvenile, has a protected place to develop, right? And so when you see this is not going to kill your tree. It might be less aesthetically pleasing, and there's things that we can do to reduce how much of this you see, but it's not going to kill your tree. So your tolerance for some of this aesthetic stuff is completely up to you. That's going to be your judgment call, but please contact your extension agent if you want something identified. So my point here, just keep an eye on your plants and see if something's going on. Here are some resources for you. My first resource, of course, is your county extension agent. If you live in Fulton County, please call me. I'm happy to talk to you about whatever gardening or agriculture topics you want to talk about. If you don't live in Fulton County, you still have an extension agent in your county. And this link on the side, which I'll put in the chat when Flannery is talking, you can find your county office and your agent's contact information at that link. My second resource I want to talk about is the NC State extension Plant Toolbox, which is a website. I love this website. I wish UGA had one of those, but it's okay because NC State has one. I highly encourage you to go on this website and use it to do research on the different plants that you want to put in your landscape. So it's got all these fact sheets about like any plant you can think of, a lot of different varieties of those plants. It'll tell you how tall that plant gets, if it produces fruit, if it's edible, what kind of soil it likes, how much sunlight it likes. It tells you all the characteristics about that plant, if it gets pests or diseases. And so that's a really, really good resource when you're doing your research and figuring out what's going to do best in your site. I also encourage you to check out the Georgia Native Plant Society. They have tons of amazing lists of native plants. They've got some affiliated blogs about gardening with native plants that have a ton of amazing information. So they're incredible. The Holistic Orchard, which I think Flannery will also talk about, is a book. It's not explicitly about native plants, but it's about sustainable organic management of an orchard. And so if you want to grow these plants, if you're interested in growing an orchard or growing other fruit trees that are non-native too, this is a good resource. And I'll just kick it over to Flannery really quick for this section.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, The Holistic Orchard is a book that we are recommended by folks who maintain community orchards, and a lot of the scale at which they're growing, is written and adapted in a way where if you're not comfortable using like pesticides or herbicide sprays, it kind of gives some more holistic methods for maintaining a healthy orchard. And again, branches out on some of those, pun intended, foundations that Gabrielle talked about earlier, and care. And then I'm about to go into more detail on this, but we do a fruit tree sale, and there are workshops and an expert table. And it's a great way to dive in and meet other folks who are also really excited about growing fruit trees and native fruit trees.
Awesome. Thank you.
And so I'll just do my last slide really quick. This was my section. Thank you. I have a little quick survey right here. If y'all are interested in telling me what you thought of this section of the presentation, feel free to snap this and then fill it out later because we're going to kick it over to Flannery. So I'll leave this up for just a second and y'all can snap it, and I'll also put the link to it in the chat. So thank you for having me. Here's my contact info. Again, if you don't live in Fulton, you have one of me in your county, please reach out to them.
Thank you so much. I am going to just share this for Flannery. And does that look okay, Flannery?
Perfect.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Gabrielle, for that awesome webinar. I think no matter how many times I learned something about fruit trees, there's always something else to learn. And I think like Gabrielle had mentioned, we have a lot of focus both on native fruit trees, but also just on fruit tree production in general, and supporting community orchards specifically. So our work supports community gardens, farms, and orchards around Metro Atlanta. There's a lot of overlap in all of that. And we do have a really strong emphasis on how can we grow food collectively for our communities. And I will say one of the things that I've really learned is having these foundations makes such a big difference. Knowing what you're thinking about ahead of time, how to pick the right tree, how to make sure your space is ready for it and you're ready for the care. But one of the best ways to continue expanding on that knowledge is to plant the trees and take care of them. And one of the ways that you can really dive into that is we do a fruit tree sale every year. So this was a initiative that was originally started by the Atlanta Local Food Initiative over 15 years ago, as a fundraiser to support the installation of community orchards. Foodwell Alliance has been managing it for the past couple years, but keeping with the spirit of it, the proceeds go towards community orchards and our programming that supports other local ag. We have a whole host of native plants, so we will have serviceberry, although we do sometimes have different species than the downy serviceberry. Muscadine, rabbit-eye blueberry, elderberry, pawpaw, as well as other fruit trees, brambles, bushes, and vines, all of which are grown at nurseries in Georgia, so they're really well adapted for growing in Georgia. Kind of the next best thing to natives there. But it's a great place to come out. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm heavily biased, obviously, but you know, you get to meet other people who are excited about growing fruit trees. We have an expert table where if you do have some specific questions about, you know, what tree is right for your space, the size it's going to get, can it be pruned to kind of fit a specific space, you can talk to folks. And then we also do workshops on everything from kind of fruit tree maintenance, which you're getting a lot of the foundations for here, to pruning, you know, to caring kind of more intermediate care. What are the next steps as you grow your orchard? So really invite you guys to join us. If you'd like to come, the date for next year's will be February 14th. Yay, Valentine's Day. We'll have pre-orders that open around Thanksgiving. We also normally do a gift card if you're interested in gifting someone, you know, fruit trees for the holidays. But yeah, okay. And then cool. And this is one of the programs that I support, but you know, if you are interested in kind of expanding the reach that your care for a community orchard could have or an orchard could have, you can steward a community orchard. And so there are over 100 community orchards around Atlanta, ranging in size from, you know, some blueberry bushes and brambles at a school all the way to, you know, 50 trees planted at a park. But they're cared for by community members who grow the food and get it back out to their community. And the Orchard Project supports that. So we have a rolling application. I have it here and we'll also link it in the chat. But it kind of gets you thinking about some of the, you know, things that Gabrielle touched on here. Does your space have sunlight, water? How are you going to access and care for it? Who's involved? You know, and what are your needs as a specific site? Um, in terms of who can apply, this is open to schools, religious organizations, community centers, parks, community gardens, farms. This is not a, you know, list in its entirety, but it has to be in a space where the community is going to be able to access that. And that can look different. Some of the trees, you know, you can just walk through, and Legacy Park in Decatur, you know, they have apple and pear trees, and if they're in fruit, you can walk through and pick them. But some spaces like community gardens have an orchard where you can come and harvest, volunteers come and harvest and donate the produce. So there's lots of different models for what the outcome of that can look like, but gets more fruit trees into community spaces. Um, if you're interested in applying, our process is, you know, you submit an application on a rolling basis. We plant in the fall. We're kind of wrapping or getting ready for that season, but I already have the sites confirmed. But we'll also plant again in the spring. We'll do a site visit with you. We'll talk about your site, you know, kind of what you might want to take into consideration, what trees you're interested in having. And then after we kind of, you know, confirm if we do a planting, we're also working on building out some educational resources and tangible support so that you're not going it alone. And if you have any interest or if you have any interest in this, I'm happy to share more information. We'll also share my contact information in the chat. But thank you.
Thank you so much, both Flannery and Gabrielle. I want to make sure that we have time for some questions since we have you on. So let's see. I'm going to just pull up all the questions that you guys have had. So the first question is, can you discuss plants that suit different parts of my yard? For example, a side yard versus a backyard versus a front yard, a median between the sidewalk and the street, which a lot of people in this person's neighborhood tend to plant.
So this is a really big question. And this is kind of the thing that you would reach out to your agent about, because I've got a lot of follow-up questions for you, right? Like a side yard may have partial shade, it may have full sun. And so these are the right things to be thinking about. This is something that I would want to have a one-on-one conversation with you about so that we can walk through, like on my right plant, right place slide, we can walk through those environmental characteristics and try and match the right plant for you, because there's just like so many different combinations of characteristics and different plants out there that are available. So I'm just going to punt this one and say, please email me.
Sounds great. Okay, another person asked, one of our old growth oak trees died this spring in our front yard. We have 3 other oaks that are nearby, and we're trying to decide what to plant in its place. We already have a dogwood under the front portion of the canopy of oaks, but we're trying to determine if we should plant another large tree, or replace it with a canopy tree or understory. So I don't know if this relates directly to a native edible one or not, or above, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So if you're looking for something that you can get edible fruit off of, I would go with one of those larger species. I guess it depends like how attached you are to your dogwood, because I see a lot of dogwoods in full sun. A lot of them are doing fine, but dogwoods are understory trees and they want a little bit of shade. And so that would be my best recommendation, is put something that's going to grow up and shade your dogwood. Whether that happens fast enough, that's a whole question, but it kind of depends what you want. Do you want a big tree back in that space? If so, you've got a couple options from the list that I talked about. You've got a hickory, you could do a pecan. Something else to consider about these like nut producing trees is those nuts are going to fall, right? So maybe don't put it where the canopy is going to be right over your house, or if you have like a deck, because it's going to be loud, or they're going to be all over wherever is right underneath of that. So that's something to consider also. But if you've got the space for a large tree, I say put a large tree there, because I mean, what's better than putting a new full-size tree in the landscape when you have the space for it, right? I think a lot of us, like, maybe I'm just speaking from my own perspective, I don't have anywhere to put like an oak tree, which are incredible, or one of these long-lived hardwood species. Something else from my list is butternut or white walnut. That could be a cool option. But maybe just consider, like, what look are you looking for? Are you looking for something similar to your previous oak? Are you looking for something different? Shagbark hickory looks really cool in the landscape. So I think that would be my recommendation. And Flannery, feel free to jump into if you have opinions.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next person said, thanks for this great talk. Would you please share what you would plant in full shade to stop erosion? You mentioned Chickasaw plum for erosion, but it looks like it needs more sun. Thank you.
So most of these shrubs will do okay in partial shade. I think full shade is going to be a little bit difficult. Probably pawpaw will do okay in full shade. It might not. It'll be a little more spindly, graceful, and open than it would be if it were in full sun, where we'll see it more like with a full canopy and it's got sort of this columnar shape. We'll see it a little more like spreading, slender in full shade. You probably will not get as many fruits off of it either, but it will live in full shade. What else? Like, most of the shrubs will do okay. They'll be a little more spindly and not as like robust, and you probably won't get as much fruit off of it. So if it's like super deep shade, you might consider putting a ground cover, a shade loving ground cover or something else in that space. I had another idea, but I can't remember what it was. Hold on, let me think. Oh, mulberry might also do okay in full shade. Again, it's not going to be as like big and robust, but it'll survive.
And all of those, I imagine, being perennials will help with erosion. To the second part.
Definitely.
How can I do an accurate soil test? The test kits I have bought online are very inaccurate and they're not helpful.
Great question. We've got an awesome publication online if you want to go through your county extension office on how to collect your soil sample. Essentially, you're taking an aggregate or like average sample of the area where you're going to plant something. So we generally encourage you to take like 8 to 10 sub samples or mini samples. You want to get, for a perennial, you want to take a slice of soil from the surface of the soil down as far as you can get, really, like we say like 8 inches, like for a perennial, so 6 to 8 inches. You want to get a slice so that you're getting a representation of that whole soil profile, right? Because the nutrients and the pH at the top might be a little bit from the bottom. So if you can get that core almost, you want to take like 8 to 10 of those, put them in a plastic bucket and mix them all around because we're getting an average across this whole area. And you're going to take those subsamples like randomly throughout the whole area, mix them all together, you let them dry out, and then you bring them into your extension office, and your extension office will mail them out for you. You can buy the test kit online. It's a little more expensive, but it's more convenient if you don't want to go into your extension office. I encourage you to go to the extension office because there's people like me there that you can talk to about it. And then within like a week or 2 weeks, you'll get your soil test report as a PDF to your email. And if you ever have questions about how to interpret your soil test report, just reach out to us and we'll talk to you about it.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And as a follow-up, how much does it cost to do a soil sample through you guys?
Good question. It depends on the county. So some of the metro counties tend to be a little more expensive because it's more expensive for us to ship them. In Fulton, a routine soil test is $12. I think it's $10 in DeKalb. I don't know what the other metro counties are, but I think if you're like not in a metro county, it goes down as low as $6 for a sample.
Great. And then we're almost out of time, so if people need to leave, go ahead. But for our dioecious plants like native persimmons, is there a way to know what you're getting from the nursery? Like, how can I tell if I'm getting at least one female?
That is a really good question. I would say like trust your nursery, get recommendations, make sure that you're buying from a reputable nursery. When you're going with these native plants, you're not going to find a lot of these at like the big box stores, but even if you're buying like a non-native fruit, I say don't buy them at the big box stores because you don't always know what you're getting. But if you can get a personal recommendation for a nursery from somebody that you know, an extension agent, a resource, like that's the place to start, I think. In terms of how you can tell if it's a female, I don't know, but I would say if you're going through a reputable nursery, you have a much higher chance of getting what it's labeled to be. Flannery, please add if you if you know how to tell.
No, I've the main difference I know of is in like the flowers. So I think it would be in later years of production. I don't know how you would tell in like a nursery scale. There are like some dioecious plants that like will come as a pair when you're buying them so that you make sure you have a male and a female. I think with persimmon, native persimmon, the recommendation is probably to plant, if you have the space, a wider, like a couple plants, so you're just increasing your odds. But yeah, I think the flowers and then obviously fruit production later is the best way to know. But I think American persimmon may be able to produce fruit without a male pollinator or plant, but I don't know that they can be produce like viable fruit. Um,
And just to clarify, I always get monoecious and dioecious confused. This is whether the plant has male and female parts on the same plant, or if you need a male and a female plant in order to get that pollination. And so actually dioecious is, yes, is where we've got a male plant and a female plant. And monoecious is where you only need one plant in order to get fruit because it's got both reproductive parts on it. And so yes, good point. American persimmon is dioecious. And so you'll need a male and a female, but I think that's a common misconception about pawpaw, which I kind of touched on. Pawpaws are monoecious, and this is true of blueberries as well. They are monoecious, but they will set fruit better if you've got genetically distinct plants cross-pollinating. So it's not about one having male or female, it's just about cross-pollinating from different individuals.
Thank you guys so much.